Shabbos Daf Yud Beis continues the discussion about not doing malacha close to Shabbos, which may end up continuing on to Shabbos. The Gemara will say that tefillin is different and that does not apply. The Gemara will then get into the halacha of not picking lice off one's clothing. The Gemara will ask whether that's because you're not allowed to kill a lice or it's because you do not want to do it to the light of a lamp, and the Gemara will try to figure out whether it is forbidden to kill lice or not. The Gemara will have a number of quotes about how different people used to deal with the killing of lice on Shabbos. Then that'll take us to a discussion about visiting the sick and mourners on Shabbos as to what you could say to the sick when you aren't allowed to be mispal in their welfare. Then the Gemara will discuss the halacha of lamps, which you're not allowed to read by on Shabbos, whether there are exceptions to different types of lamps or different types of individuals, or individuals who are reading together, or servants, whether their halacha might be different. The Gemara is in the middle of trying to resolve a contradiction between two brises, which are discussing the halacha of a zub, who would wear a sanitary napkin to catch discharges that he had from his body. Is he allowed to walk out with that on Shabbos into the public domain, or is that called carrying? So there was one brisa that said that if he would do that, it would be an Isser D'Oraisa, and there was one that said it would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. So the Gemara tried a few attempts to resolve the contradiction unsuccessfully, and here the Gemara presents its final solution. The Gemara says this is the famous Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. One brisa is Rabbi Yehuda, one brisa is Rabbi Shimon. Now this is Machlokes, one of many Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, which run throughout Masechta Shabbos, and this one is about something called Malacha She'eina Tzricha L'Gufa. Malacha She'eina Tzricha L'Gufa is where you do a malacha, one of the actions which was performed in the Mishkan, but your purpose is different than the one that was then the intent that the malacha was performed in the Mishkan was. So carrying, as far as the Mishkan was concerned, was transferring an object from one place to a place where it's more useful. A Malacha She'eina Tzricha L'Gufa version of carrying would be if you're not carrying the object in order to get it somewhere, you're carrying it for some other purpose, or to get rid of something. In this situation, you're not carrying it because you want to move the sanitary cloth from place to place. You're carrying it because you need it to keep your clothing clean. That's a Malacha She'eina Tzricha L'Gufa. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's an Isser D'Oraisa. According to Rabbi Shimon, that's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Now the Gemara goes back to the subject we were discussing earlier, which is that you shouldn't walk out into the public domain carrying something just before Shabbos because you may end up carrying it even on Shabbos. Now the Gemara says there's an exception to that. Rabbi Bar Huna says if you're wearing tefillin, that's okay. Even though tefillin you're not allowed to wear on Shabbos itself, it would be carrying if you did, but you're allowed to wear them just before Shabbos. You're not afraid that you're actually going to wear them on Shabbos because a person has to constantly be aware of his tefillin. We know that the halacha is that the tzitz that the Kohen Gadol wore, he had to be constantly aware of. Like it says, he has to always be aware of it. And the tefillin has many mentions of Hashem's name, while the tzitz only had one. So tefillin you certainly have to be aware of all the time. Therefore, he will certainly be aware of it. He will not wear it on Shabbos accidentally. Now, the Rishonim here ask, even if he wore it on Shabbos, it would only be an Isser D'Rabbanan, and therefore this is in essence a question of Gzeira L'Gzeira, which is a topic we discussed earlier. And the Rishonim offer several answers for that. Now the Gemara has a brisa. Brisa says, Chanani says, a person should be careful to check his clothing every Shabbos just before nightfall to make sure he's not carrying something by mistake in the pockets. And Rav Yosef says this is a important halacha in Hilchos Shabbos to avoid problems. The Gemara now addresses the next halacha which we saw in our Mishnah, which is possibly a combination of two. The Mishnah says as follows. It says one should not remove the lice from his clothing on Shabbos. And the Mishnah says one should not read by the light of a lamp on Shabbos because you may come to tilt the lamp. Now the Gemara is unclear if the light of the lamp is related to the removing of the lice. The Gemara asks, the reason you're not allowed to remove lice on Shabbos is because you're using the light of the lamp and you may come to tilt the lamp that's included in the light of the lamp, or are we referring to removing lice during the day and the reason why you're not supposed to remove them is because you may kill them? So the Gemara is not sure. So the Gemara quotes another source. The Gemara is a brisa. The brisa says that you may not remove lice on Shabbos and you may not read by the light of a lamp. So the Gemara says this doesn't help. It's just as unclear. We still don't know if the phrase reading by the light of the lamp, if the phrase light of the lamp is going back on reading only, or if it's also going back on removing the lice. Now the Gemara at first had thought that it's possible that because a brisa is usually more wordy than a Mishnah, if the brisa meant to go back, it would have said so. And now the Gemara has another brisa which does conclusively say so. This one says one should not remove lice from garments by the light of a lamp, and one should not read by the light of a fire also. Umar says these are the halachas that were learned in the upper floor of Hananiah ben Garyon. That was where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel voted on a number of halachas. So here we see that this Mishnah at least is understanding that it's only usher to remove lice from clothing on Shabbos because you're using the light of a lamp, and anything which you're doing which is involved by the light of the lamp, you may come to tilt the lamp in order to have it burn brighter. Now we will get to the discussion of whether it's permitted to kill lice on Shabbos in a few lines. First, the Gemara over here specifies some more details about what you're not allowed to do to the light of a lamp, and the Gemara here will say that it's only something which is a seriously involved activity. The Gemara says, as far as distinguishing between clothing to the light of the lamp, so it's only clothing which is very similar, and it's hard to distinguish them. You shouldn't use the light of a lamp, and that refers to, an example of that is a man trying to tell his clothing from his wife's if his wife is an older woman in the town of Mechoza, because Mechoza people didn't really work much, so their clothing was wide sleeved like women's are, and older women had more narrow sleeved clothing than young girls. So if he lived somewhere else, then his clothing would be different than his wife's, or if his wife was young in Mechoza, his clothing would be different because she would have wider sleeves. Either way, the concept is that it's only if the clothing is very similar that you're not allowed to use the light of a candle to try to tell them apart. Now the Gemara goes into the discussion of killing lice on Shabbos. So the issue over here is as follows. It is forbidden to kill any living creature on Shabbos. This is a malacha of shaychit. However, that is only something which is born from a mother and a father. The Gemara has some discussion about whether lice are or aren't. Even if lice are, they are certainly born from eggs that are too small to see, and therefore possibly that doesn't count as being born from a living creature. It could just count as something which spontaneously generates. So the Gemara says, not in this order, but the Gemara says that is a brisa, which is quoted by Rav Shimon ben Elazar, says it's machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says you're allowed to kill lice on Shabbos. Beis Shammai says you're not. Rav Elazar also says that you are not allowed to kill lice on Shabbos, and therefore we get into the issue of how are you allowed to remove lice from your clothing on Shabbos, because you may come to kill them. So the Gemara has a brisa and an amir with three different approaches to this. The brisa quotes the Chachamim who say that you're allowed to kill the lice, you're not allowed to kill the lice, and if you did, it would be an Isur D'Rabbanan. Therefore, you're allowed to take lice off your clothing, and you're allowed to even roll it between your fingers to stun it, to make sure it doesn't go back onto your clothing, comes close to killing it, because killing it would only be an Isur D'Rabbanan, and therefore you're allowed to, but you should try to make sure that you don't kill it. Now, Abba Shaul says you should not even roll it between your fingers, because if you might kill it by mistake, and that would be an Isur D'Oraisa, according to him. Rav Huna says you're allowed to roll the lice between your fingers and toss it away, and even if you end up killing it by mistake, we're not so bothered, because we do not hold that that's a major Isur. Now the Gemara discusses how different Amorim would deal with lice on Shabbos. Rabbah killed them straight. He held it was mutter. Rav Sheshes also did. Rava wanted to cause them to die, but not directly kill them, so he threw them into a bucket of water. Rav Nachman said to his daughter, kill the lice, let me hear them scream. And he was trying to make it clear that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, you're allowed to kill lice on Shabbos, that it's not usher at all. Now the same brisa which quoted the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel continues, and it says that it's forbidden to speak certain words on Shabbos, and those are words which are involved in creating a deal, a business deal, or situations which will cause a person pain. So an example of a business deal which you aren't allowed to do is you're not allowed to make a shidduch, you're not allowed to come to an agreement that two people will marry each other. You're also not allowed to hire a tutor to teach Torah to your son. An example of speech which will cause a person pain is you should not comfort mourners, nicham avelim, and you should not visit the sick. Now this is all Beis Shammai's opinion. Beis Hillel, however, says all this is mutter, even though you have two types of business deals and two types of things which cause pain, but it's permitted. The business deals are a mitzvah, and the things which cause pain here bring nechama, bring relief to the person that you're saying them to, and therefore you're allowed to do them on Shabbos. Now the Gemara launches into a discussion of how you're allowed to visit the sick on Shabbos. What should you say? Now on Shabbos it's forbidden to pray for a person who is not in a situation of life-threatening illness. And the problem is that when you come to visit the guy, and he sees that you're not going to give him a bracha, you're not going to be mispalel to Hashem, when you visit the sick, it's not just to show up. You're supposed to see what he needs, and you're also supposed to ask Hashem to send him a recovery. If he sees on Shabbos you're not doing that, he may be upset because he feels like Shabbos is preventing him from receiving the prayers. So you're supposed to say some sort of prayer which is permitted, or some manner of consoling him that Shabbos will not harm him from his recovery. So the Gemara lists a number. The Gemara has a brisa which lists of how a number of chachamim would deal with this. So the Gemara says that the Tanakama says he should say Shabbos. He's not being misfal to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but he's wishing him well. He's saying Shabbos we can't ask Hashem, we can't cry to Hashem, but your recovery will come soon anyway. Shabbos will not prevent it. The Gemara says that Rabbi Meir said Shabbos can actually bring your recovery. If you keep Shabbos correctly, it will interfere with heaven on your behalf. Rabbi Yehuda says you can say to him that he should get well. You're not being mispal to Hashem, and you should connect it with other people who are sick. And you should say as follows: and may Hashem have mercy on you and on the other sick people of Yisrael. By mentioning the public as well, it's not a specific prayer for him, and that's okay. Rabbi Yossi says you should combine them together. You should say, Hashem should have mercy upon you among all the sick of Israel. That way you're really being mispal for everybody, and that's a stronger prayer on his behalf. But again, you're not speaking to Hashem, so it's not a tefillah which is forbidden. Now, the Gemara says that Shevna, who was an important person in Yerushalayim, whenever he went to visit the sick, he would say a similar thing, but he would be certain to start and end with the word Shalom, which is one of the names of Hashem, which is in a sense closer to a tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but not quite a tefillah. He would say as follows: he would start off and he would say Shalom, and then he would say Shabbos hi mi lizig rafur krava lavoi v'shivsu b'shalom. And at the end, he would end off and say you should rest in Shalom, with peace, to keep Shabbos. Now the Gemara says we have a statement of Reb Chanina, who says that you should combine a sick person together with the rest of Yisrael when you're being misfal for him. You should say, you should be Arvenu, B'soich. The Gemara says, who is that like? That's like Rabbi Yossi, who said you should say B'soich Chalei Yisrael. Now, the Gemara says Reb Chanina also said that it was only with great reluctance that Chachamim made it mutter to console the mourners and visit the sick on Shabbos. The Gemara quotes how Rav Elazar would greet the sick even during the week. The Gemara says that Rabbi Bar Chana says when we went with Rabbi Elazar to visit the sick, sometimes he would speak to him in Hebrew and sometimes in Aramaic. He would sometimes say Hamakim Yifkadcha l'Shalom, and sometimes he would say Rechmana Yidkirinach l'Shlam. So why the difference? The Gemara says the Rishonim explain that he would speak in Hebrew if the person understood Hebrew, otherwise he would say in the language that he understood. Now the Gemara asks, how could he do this? This is a tefillah. I mean, you're not allowed to be mispalel for an individual in Aramaic, only for the public, because the public do not need malachim to take their tefillahs into Hashem. But the malachim that are supposed to take tefillahs into Hashem don't understand Aramaic. So if it's not for a minyan, for a public, and you're going to say it in Aramaic, it will not work. Where it says it was different, because when you're visiting the sick, you do not need malachim, because the Shekhinah is there, and we know that the Shekhinah is near the sick because it says Hashem Yisadenu al Eretz Devai. The pasuk says Hashem will support the people who are sick. The Gemara later says that Rava quoted this in the name of Ravin also. And the Gemara has a brisa here. The one who goes to visit the sick should be careful not to sit on a higher surface than the sick person himself, such as a chair or a bed, because the Shekhinah is resting on the pillow, kaviyachol, resting on the pillow of the sick man, and you do not want to be sitting higher than the Shekhinah. The Gemara now goes back to the halacha that the Mishnah said, that it is forbidden to read by the light of a lamp, lest you come to adjust the flame. So the Gemara is going to investigate as to whether there are exceptions to this rule or it applies across the board. So first of all, as far as the lamp itself, where it is and what it is. So the Gemara says that Rabbi says that there is a light plug. That means there is no exceptions. There is a general broad rule. No matter what the type of fire is, it's forbidden to read by its light, even if it is twice your height, even if it is 10 houses on top of each other, so you couldn't possibly adjust it. We have a general rule: no reading by the light of a fire, and the Gemara will make it clear later that this applies even to a large fire in the hearth. Now the Gemara says, what about the people? So the Gemara says that there's possible that there are exceptions. If you have two people that are reading together, and they are reading from the same chapter, from the same section, then it's permitted for them to read by the light of a lamp, because one will stop the other one if he sees him reading to adjust. However, if they are reading two separate things, so each one will be absorbed in his own reading, and therefore he will not catch the other one. Now, Rav Huna says if it's a bonfire, so then even the 10 people is forbidden, because the bonfire fills the entire room with light, and people could be spread far away from each other. It's not like sitting near each other at the light of a candle. Now, the Gemara has another exception. If a person is chashuv, if he is a distinguished individual, so they were not accustomed to adjusting the lights. They had a servant who adjusted the lights for them. So there's no way that he would absent-mindedly reach out to adjust the candle. So now the Gemara says, but we have an example where a very chashuv person nearly made a mistake and adjusted the light. There's two versions of this. It concerns Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. He said that I'm not worried about this gezerah of Chazal, and I can read, and I will not make a mistake. And there's two versions as to what happened. Either he once caught himself just before he adjusted the light, or he actually did adjust the light. Either way, we see here clearly that he almost adjusted the light, or he did, and there is no principle that a person's chashuv, then he won't come to adjust it. Gemara says that's different. When Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was learning, he didn't feel like a chashuv individual. He was so involved that he took on the rules of a commoner. He did not hold himself above anything that was happening. Now, the Bryce here says an interesting thing. It says when in the version that Rabbi Shmuel actually did violate the halacha and tilt the lamp, he was now chayav a carbon chatos, and he said he kept a notebook where he had a list of what he's chayav and what he's not, and he marked down that he's chayav chatas, and then when the Beis Hamikdash will come, he will bring a carbon chatas. There are some sources that a person is obligated to keep such a notebook, and he should have a clear calculation of what carbonas he has to bring, so that he can, when the Beis Hamikdash will finally be rebuilt. The Gemara now quotes a contradiction between two brises as far as whether or not this halacha applies to servants. The Gemara says there's one brisa that says that a servant is allowed to check cups and plates and make sure that they are clean to the light of a lamp, and another one says that he's not allowed to. Contradiction. So the Gemara offers two answers. One is that a permanent household servant is not allowed to because he is afraid of his master, and therefore he wants to be very careful that he makes sure that the plates are clean, and if he checks it to the light of a candle, he'll end up tilting the cup. On the other hand, a temporary servant who's just hired is not so fearful, and therefore he will not tilt the cup, and he doesn't care so much about whether it's clean or not. That's one answer. And the second answer is that there's two types of lamps. An oil lamp, it is easier to tilt, but a kerosene lamp smells very foul, and therefore people will not come close to it to tilt it. Now, the Gemara asks, what about a temporary servant who is not so likely to tilt, but is using an oil lamp which he is likely to tilt? What about that combination? So the Gemara says the halacha is that he's allowed to, but we do not advertise that halacha in public. We don't want people to make mistakes. The Gemara has a story here. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba went to the house of Rav Asi, and Rav Yirmiyah brought his servant with him, and his servant was checking the cups and the plates to make sure that they were clean. So Rav Asi's wife said to him, but we don't allow that. So he said, that's all right. He holds like his master, Rav Yirmiyah, who says that he is allowed to, or according to Rashi, it's because he was only a temporary servant because he wasn't in his own house. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that a chazan is allowed to look where the children are reading in order to prepare the parsha for tomorrow. So the Gemara asks, we just said he's not allowed to read. How come he's allowed to read now? The Gemara says he's not really reading, he's just checking where the parsha begins and ends. So the Gemara says, but that means that he's not allowed to read the whole thing. But there is a brisa that says that the children are allowed to read. They're allowed to prepare what they are reading the next day. So why did you say that he's not allowed to read the whole thing? Smar gives two answers, and where it says either those children are also just preparing the beginning, they're not really reading the whole thing, or children are different because since they have a teacher who's watching them, they are not going to tilt the lamp by accident because they're living in fear of the teacher.